Guten Abend. Heute Nacht lade ich Sie ein, in eine der schönsten und geheimnisvollsten Geschichten aller Zeiten einzutauchen. Bevor wir beginnen, nehmen Sie sich einen Moment, um das Video zu liken und zu abonnieren. Natürlich nur, wenn Sie diese ruhigen, zeitlosen Erzählungen wirklich lieben. Schreiben Sie mir gern, von wo Sie zuhören und wie spät es bei Ihnen ist. Es ist immer wundervoll zu sehen, wie weit unsere kleine Gemeinschaft über die Welt verstreut ist. Jetzt dimmen Sie das Licht, lassen Sie den Tag hinter sich und begleiten Sie mich in die Stille, wo die Geschichte langsam zu atmen beginnt.
The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom surrounded by mountains and meadows, there lived a young prince who longed to marry a princess. But not just any princess. She had to be a real one, born of grace and truth, whose heart was as noble as her crown. He set out upon a grand journey to find her, traveling across seas and forests, through bustling cities and quiet valleys, visiting courts where music played and laughter filled the air. Many princesses he met indeed, some dazzling with jewels, some gentle in speech, yet none seemed quite right. There was always something a little off, a shadow behind their smiles, or a note of vanity in their words. Perhaps I ask too much, he would whisper to himself, yet deep inside he knew he sought not perfection, but authenticity. And so, after many months of wandering, he returned home, weary and heartsick, for though the world was vast, he had not found what he truly desired. One evening, as the prince sat gazing out of the palace window, the skies grew dark and heavy. A storm rolled in with great fury. Lightning split the heavens, thunder roared like drums of war, and the rain came down in sheets so thick that the castle towers vanished behind a curtain of silver water. The wind howled through the gates, shaking the great doors as if some spirit sought entry. Then came a knocking, timid at first, then louder. The old king, kind though cautious, went himself to open the gate. And there stood a young woman, drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her gown was torn and muddy, and her shoes squelched with every step. Yet even through her disarray, there was a certain light in her eyes, calm, proud, and unshaken by the storm. "I am a princess," she said softly, "and I have lost my way. Might I have shelter for the night?" The old queen, wise and perceptive, looked at her closely. A real princess, she wondered. Appearances could deceive, and many had claimed such titles before. "We shall see," she thought, with a small, knowing smile. She ordered a room prepared, but in her heart she devised a quiet little test, one known only to her. While the servants dried the young woman's clothes and set a warm fire by her bedside, the queen entered the chamber herself. She stripped the bed bare, right down to the frame, and upon the wooden slats she placed a single green pea. Then she called for 20 mattresses to be stacked high, one upon another, soft as clouds. And on top of them she laid 20 feather beds, so thick and downy that they seemed fit for dreams themselves. "Let us see," she murmured, "if she truly has the delicacy of royal blood." That night, the princess climbed the towering bed with the help of a small ladder. She thanked the servants politely, lay down, and closed her eyes as the rain still whispered against the windows. When morning came, the queen entered the room and greeted her guest with a smile. "Did you rest well, my dear?" "Oh, not at all," the princess exclaimed, rubbing her eyes. "I scarcely slept a wink. Something hard was pressing beneath me all night. I'm sure of it. My body aches as if I had lain upon stones. What could possibly be in that bed?" The queen's eyes sparkled. Indeed, she thought, only a true princess could feel a pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. For such delicate sensitivity could come only from one raised in gentleness, in a heart attuned to the slightest discomfort of the world. The prince was overjoyed. He had searched the earth for a real princess, and now, by the simplest of tests, he had found her, not in splendor or ceremony, but in humility and truth. Her grace had been proven not by jewels or words, but by the quiet honesty of her heart. And so, in time, he took her hand in marriage. Bells rang throughout the kingdom, and the people rejoiced, for the prince had found the one who was truly his equal. As for the little pea, it was carefully placed in a crystal case and set in the Royal Museum, where it can still be seen to this very day, unless, of course, someone has stolen it. And that, dear reader, is a true story. As true as the feeling of a pea beneath 20 mattresses and the tenderness of a heart that can still feel what others cannot. The flax. The flax was in full bloom. It had pretty little blue flowers, as delicate as the wings of a moth, or even more so. The sun shone, and the showers watered it. And this was just as good for the flax as it is for little children to be washed and then kissed by their mother. They look much prettier for it, and so did the flax. "People say that I look exceedingly well," said the flax, "and that I am so fine and long that I shall make a beautiful piece of linen. How fortunate I am! It makes me so happy. It is such a pleasant thing to know that something can be made of me. How the sunshine cheers me, and how sweet and refreshing is the rain. My happiness overpowers me. No one in the world can feel happier than I am." "Ah, yes, no doubt," said the fern, "but you do not know the world yet as well as I do, for my sticks are knotty." And then it sung quite mournfully. "Snip, snap, snurre, baslurre, the song is ended." "No, it is not ended," said the flax. "Tomorrow the sun will shine, or the rain descend. I feel that I am growing. I feel that I am in full blossom. I am the happiest of all creatures." Well, one day some people came who took hold of the flax and pulled it up by the roots. This was painful. Then it was laid in water as if they intended to drown it, and after that, placed near a fire as if it were to be roasted. All this was very shocking. "We cannot expect to be happy always," said the flax. "By experiencing evil as well as good, we become wise." And certainly there was plenty of evil in store for the flax. It was steeped and roasted and broken and combed. Indeed, it scarcely knew what was done to it. At last it was put on the spinning wheel. Whir, whir, went the wheel so quickly that the flax could not collect its thoughts. "Well, I have been very happy," he thought in the midst of his pain, "and must be contented with the past." And contented he remained till he was put on the loom, and became a beautiful piece of white linen. All the flax, even to the last stalk, was used in making this one piece. Well, this is quite wonderful. I could not have believed that I should be so favored by fortune. The fern was not wrong with its song of snip, snap, snurre, baslurre. But the song is not ended yet, I am sure. It is only just beginning. How wonderful it is that after all I have suffered, I am made something of at last. I am the luckiest person in the world, so strong and fine. and how white, and what a length! This is something different to being a mere plant and bearing flowers. Then I had no attention, nor any water unless it rained. Now I am watched and taken care of. Every morning the maid turns me over, and I have a shower bath from the watering pot every evening. Yes, and the clergyman's wife noticed me and said I was the best piece of linen in the whole parish. I cannot be happier than I am now. After some time, the linen was taken into the house, placed under the scissors, and cut and torn into pieces, and then pricked with needles. This certainly was not pleasant, but at last it was made into 12 garments of that kind, which people do not like to name, and yet everybody should wear one. "See now, then," said the Flax, "I have become something of importance. This was my destiny. It is quite a blessing. Now I shall be of some use in the world, as everyone ought to be. It is the only way to be happy. I am now divided into 12 pieces, and yet we are all one and the same in the whole dozen. It is most extraordinary good fortune." Years passed away, and at last the linen was so worn it could scarcely hold together. "It must end very soon," said the pieces to each other. "We would gladly have held together a little longer, but it is useless to expect impossibilities." And at length they fell into rags and tatters, and thought it was all over with them, for they were torn to shreds and steeped in water, and made into a pulp, and dried, and they knew not what. Besides, till all at once they found themselves beautiful white paper. "Well now, this is a surprise, a glorious surprise too," said the paper. "I am now finer than ever, and I shall be written upon, and who can tell what fine things I may have written upon me? This is wonderful luck." And sure enough, the most beautiful stories and poetry were written upon it, and only once was there a blot, which was very fortunate. Then people heard the stories and poetry read, and it made them wiser and better, for all that was written had a good and sensible meaning, and a great blessing was contained in the words on this paper. "I never imagined anything like this," said the paper, "when I was only a little blue flower growing in the fields. How could I fancy that I should ever be the means of bringing knowledge and joy to man? I cannot understand it myself, and yet it is really so. Heaven knows that I have done nothing myself, but what I was obliged to do with my weak powers for my own preservation, and yet I have been promoted from one joy and honor to another. Each time I think that the song is ended, and then something higher and better begins for me. I suppose now I shall be sent on my travels about the world, so that people may read me. It cannot be otherwise. Indeed, it is more than probable, for I have more splendid thoughts written upon me than I had pretty flowers in olden times. I am happier than ever. But the paper did not go on its travels. It was sent to the printer, and all the words written upon it were set up in type to make a book, or rather, many hundreds of books. For so many more persons could derive pleasure and profit from a printed book than from the written paper. And if the paper had been sent around the world, it would have been worn out before it had got half through its journey. "This is certainly the wisest plan," said the written paper. "I really did not think of that. I shall remain at home and be held in honor, like some old grandfather, as I really am to all these new books. They will do some good. I could not have wandered about as they do. Yet he who wrote all this has looked at me as every word flowed from his pen upon my surface. I am the most honored of all." Then the paper was tied in a bundle with other papers, and thrown into a tub that stood in the wash-house. "After work, it is well to rest," said the paper, "and a very good opportunity to collect one's thoughts. Now I am able, for the first time, to think of my real condition, and to know oneself is true progress. What will be done with me now, I wonder? No doubt I shall still go forward. I have always progressed hitherto, as I know quite well." Now it happened one day that all the paper in the tub was taken out and laid on the hearth to be burnt. People said it could not be sold at the shop to wrap up butter and sugar because it had been written upon. The children in the house stood round the stove, for they wanted to see the paper burn because it flamed up so prettily, and afterwards among the ashes so many red sparks could be seen running one after the other, here and there, as quick as the wind. They called it seeing the children come out of school, and the last spark was the schoolmaster. They often thought the last spark had come, and one would cry, "There goes the schoolmaster." But the next moment another spark would appear, shining so beautifully. How they would like to know where the sparks all went to. Perhaps we shall find out some day, but we don't know now. The whole bundle of paper had been placed on the fire and was soon alight. "Ugh!" cried the paper as it burst into a bright flame. "Ugh!" It was certainly not very pleasant to be burning, but when the whole was wrapped in flames, the flames mounted up into the air, higher than the flax had ever been able to raise its little blue flower, and they glistened as the white linen never could have glistened. All the written letters became quite red in a moment, and all the words and thoughts turned to fire. "Now I am mounting straight up to the sun," said a voice in the flames. And it was as if 1,000 voices echoed the words, and the flames darted up through the chimney and went out at the top. Then a number of tiny beings, as many in number as the flowers on the flax had been, and invisible to mortal eyes, floated above them. They were even lighter and more delicate than the flowers from which they were born, and as the flames were extinguished, and nothing remained of the paper but black ashes, these little beings danced upon it, and whenever they touched it, bright red sparks appeared. "The children are all out of school, and the schoolmaster was the last of all," said the children. "It was good fun, and they sang over the dead ashes. Snip, snap, snurr, bass lure, the song is ended." But the little invisible beings said, "The song is never ended. The most beautiful is yet to come." But the children could neither hear nor understand this, nor should they, for children must not know everything. The loveliest rose in the world. There once lived a mighty queen, whose palace stood amidst terraces of marble and gardens that seemed to breathe with eternal spring. Every path was lined with blossoms from every corner of the world, from far eastern orchids that smelled of moonlight to desert lilies that bloomed only beneath starlit silence. Yet above all these wonders, the queen's heart belonged to the rose. She loved it in all its forms, the humble hedge-rose that perfumed the hedgerows with apple sweetness, and the proud Provence rose whose petals blushed like dawn upon snow. Roses climbed the pillars of her galleries, trailed over the archways, and framed her windows with living garlands. They spread their fragrance through the corridors, and even upon the ceilings of her great halls, where the air was always heavy with their perfume. But though her palace overflowed with life and beauty, care and sorrow had taken up residence within those glittering walls. The queen, so adored by her people, so blessed in riches, lay upon a couch of silk, pale and still as a fallen petal. The physicians, wise in all the arts of healing, could offer no remedy. Her end draws near, they whispered. Yet one among them, the eldest and most learned, lifted his head and spoke with calm conviction. There is still one hope. If we could bring to her the loveliest rose in all the world, one that embodies the purest, brightest love. And if her eyes behold it before they close forever, she shall not die. Then word went out across kingdoms and seas. Messengers galloped through snow and storm. Sailors braved tempest and tide. From every garden came those who bore roses, some golden as sunrise, others red as coral, others white as frost. Yet none of these could save her. They were beautiful, but not that rose, not the flower born in the garden of love itself. And so poets and priests, mothers and maidens, each offered their thought of where the truest love might bloom. The poets sang, for they had dreamed of this rose all their lives. They wrote verses filled with longing and faith, but when their blossoms were brought before the queen, their fragrance faded like sighs in the air. No one has found it, said the wise man sadly. No one has named the place where it grows in its full glory. It is not the rose that sprang from the tomb of Romeo and Juliet, though that flower is nourished by tears of eternal devotion. It is not the bloom that blossomed upon Walberg's grave, though holy legends sing of it. Nor is it the crimson flower, born from the blood of Winkelried, the hero who died for his country. Noble though such blood be, sacred though such sacrifice remains. The color of courage cannot equal the hue of divine love. Neither does it grow in the secret gardens of science, where lonely seekers spend sleepless nights, sacrificing youth to wrest miracles from nature's hand. No, the loveliest rose must spring from a soil far deeper, from the heart. Then among the courtiers stepped a gentle mother, her face bright with faith. In her arms she carried her little child, whose laughter seemed to scatter sunlight through the chamber. I know where it blooms, she said softly. I have seen the loveliest rose. It opens upon the cheeks of my child, when, after peaceful sleep, he wakes and smiles at me with innocent love. That smile, that trust, is the purest rose that heaven allows to grow on earth. The wise man smiled tenderly. It is indeed a lovely rose, he said, and its scent is holy, but there is one lovelier still. Then a woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. I have seen it too, she said, and no rose on earth can match it. It was pale, white as a petal kissed by moonlight, and I saw it upon the cheeks of our queen herself. For through one long, sorrowful night, she carried her sick child in her arms. She laid aside her golden crown, forgot her rank and majesty, and wept over her little one. She kissed him, prayed for him, and held him until dawn broke. That white rose was born of a mother's grief, pure as snow upon an altar. The wise man bowed his head. Holy indeed is that rose, he murmured. It is watered by tears of love and pain, and its beauty is beyond mortal art. Yet even that is not the one we seek. Silence fell. The lamps flickered. Outside, the garden roses drooped as if they too waited. At last an old bishop lifted his staff and spoke. I have seen the rose, said he, at the Lord's table. It shone brighter than gold, for I saw a young maiden kneel before the altar and renew the vows of her baptism. Upon her cheeks glowed both red and white, the roses of purity and faith united. Her eyes were lifted to heaven with love unshadowed, her soul radiant as an angel's. In that moment, I beheld the expression of the highest love on earth. "Blessed be she," said the wise man reverently. "Yet still, none has brought the loveliest rose in the world." Then the door creaked open, and into the chamber came a child, the queen's own little son. His small hands held a great book bound in velvet, clasped with silver. Tears sparkled on his cheeks like dew upon a morning flower. He climbed to his mother's side and cried, "Mother, listen to what I have read." And he opened the holy book and began to read with trembling voice the words of him who gave his life for all mankind, even for those yet unborn. "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." As he spoke, a gentle color, soft and roseate, returned to the queen's cheeks. Her eyes, once dim, grew bright with wonder. For from the pages of that sacred book she beheld, not with mortal sight, but with the vision of the soul, a rose unfolding, radiant beyond all earthly bloom. Its petals glowed with divine light. Its fragrance filled the room with peace. It was the image of him who hung upon the cross, shedding his blood in love that knows no end. "I see it," whispered the queen. "Yes, now I see the loveliest rose in all the world, the rose that never fades, the rose of eternal love." And as she gazed upon it, strength flowed back into her heart. Her pain was lifted, her breath came gently, like the sigh of spring wind among blossoms. The wise man bowed low and said softly, "He who beholds this rose shall never die." Outside, in the royal gardens, the other roses seemed to bow their heads. The air grew fragrant as if heaven itself had breathed upon the earth. And though the petals of the worldly flowers fell with the turning of seasons, the queen's rose, the rose of divine love, bloomed forever in her soul, shining with the promise that love, stronger than death, is the truest flower of all. Kept secret, but not forgotten. Once, in a time when fortified manors still dotted the countryside, there stood an ancient mansion, surrounded by a wide, murky moat, and guarded by a formidable drawbridge. This drawbridge was more often raised than lowered, for the inhabitants of the house were cautious. Not every visitor carried good intentions. Along the eaves of the lofty building were loopholes, narrow slits through which arrows could fly, and from which boiling water, sometimes even molten lead, might be poured onto any intruder bold enough to approach too near. Inside, the ceilings soared high, their timber beams supporting the weight of countless winters, allowing the smoke of great hearth fires to curl upward without choking the air. Massive logs, damp and dense, roared in the fire, filling the rooms with a comforting yet oppressive heat. On the walls hung portraits of gallant men in gleaming armor, proud dames swathed in heavy, elegant robes, and among them, the grandest of all, a lady of rare beauty and courage, lived here. Her name was Meta Mogans, the lady of the manor, a mistress as gracious as she was wise. One stormy evening, fate brought misfortune to the mansion. A band of robbers broke through the defenses. They slew 3 of the loyal guards, silenced the fierce watchdog, and seized Lady Met, binding her with the very chain that had restrained the dog in its kennel. The intruders then made themselves comfortable in the great hall, drinking her wine and consuming the finest beers of the cellar with reckless delight. Lady Met, though chained and helpless, could not even raise her voice to warn the outside world. She stood there, dignified, yet powerless, a prisoner in her own home. But hope arrived in an unexpected form. The robber's servant boy, a quiet and clever lad, had slipped away unnoticed, understanding that discovery would have meant his death. He approached the lady softly and said, "Lady Meta Mogans, do you recall my father, in your husband's time, riding the wooden horse? You prayed then for his well-being, yet there was little more you could do to save him. He was made to endure cruel torment, sitting astride a block until he was crippled. Yet, secretly, you visited him, as I have done now. You placed small stones beneath his feet to grant him some relief. None saw it, or perhaps they pretended not to. You were the gracious young mistress, and your compassion was kept hidden, yet it was never forgotten. Now I will repay your kindness, Lady Met. I will free you." Together they mounted horses from the stables and rode through wind and rain, seeking friends who could aid them. Lady Meta felt a profound sense of gratitude, a deep and quiet joy. Such a small deed, long ago, now repaid in such a remarkable way, she murmured. The boy smiled. Kept secret, Lady Met, but never forgotten. In due time, justice was served. The robbers were captured and hanged. The old house remained, standing to this day, not as the home of Lady Met, but now occupied by another noble family. Sunlight glinted off gilded spires, wooded islets dotted the lake like scattered bouquets, and wild swans swam gracefully around them. Roses bloomed in the gardens, but the true beauty was the lady herself, radiant with happiness born of deeds done not for show, but from the pure intentions of her heart. Good works were her secret joy, quiet as whispers, yet known and cherished in unseen ways. One day, Lady Meta traveled from the mansion to a humble peasant cottage in the fields. Inside lived a poor, paralyzed girl. Her small window faced north, where sunlight rarely reached, showing only a patch of meadow hemmed in by earth and ditch. Yet today, warmth and light poured through a new window, where once there had been only a bare wall. The sun, a gift from the south, filled the room. The girl sat in that radiance, gazing at the woods and streams beyond. The world had expanded for her in an instant, transformed by a single kind word from the lady. So simple a deed, Lady Met reflected, yet the happiness it brings is beyond all measure, a blessing beyond words. And so she continued, visiting the poor, remembering the afflicted in both humble cottages and grand homes. Her acts of charity were discreet, hidden from the eyes of the world. Yet in heaven they were treasured, kept secret but never forgotten. In another part of the city, an old house with many chambers and halls stood quietly. We shall linger not in its grand rooms, but in its kitchen. Here all is tidy and bright, copper pots gleam, the table polished, the sink spotless as though freshly scrubbed, the work of a devoted maid who still found time to adorn herself in her best dress, the black bow on her cap signaling mourning. She had no close kin to mourn, no father, no mother, no lover. She was poor and yet rich in love. Once shared with a young man of humble means. Once engaged, they cherished each other deeply, but circumstance pulled them apart. Do what will secure your happiness, she had told him, urging him toward a wealthy widow who offered security. Years passed. She met him again in the street. He looked pale and weary. "How fares your life?" she asked. "Well, in worldly matters," he said, "yet you remain in my heart. Soon the struggle will end, and we shall see each other no more until the Lord calls us." Days later, the news came. He had passed away. He left behind a wife and 3 stepchildren. The maid wore mourning, the black bow on her cap a testament to grief quietly held, kept secret, yet indelibly remembered. 3 tales, like leaves sprouting from the same stalk, each illustrating the quiet power of goodness, of deeds done without witness, yet treasured in the heart and by the Lord. And in the book of the heart, there are countless more such leaves, kept secret, yet never forgotten. Aunty, you ought to have known Aunty. She was so lovely. And yet, to be more specific, she wasn't lovely in the usual sense of the word, but she was sweet and charming and funny in her own way. Just the type to gossip about when one is in the mood to gossip and be facetious over someone. She should have been put in a play, just because she herself simply lived for the theater and everything that goes on in it. She was so very respectable, even if Agent Nob, whom Aunty called Snob, said she was stage-struck. "The theater is my schoolroom," she said, "my fountain of knowledge. There I have brushed up on my old biblical history. Take Moses, for instance, or Joseph and his brethren. They're operas now. It is from the theater that I've gained my knowledge of world history, geography, and human nature. I've learned about Parisian life from French farces. It's naughty, but very interesting. How I have cried over the Riekeborg family, to think that the husband had to drink himself to death, just so his wife could get her young sweetheart. Ah, yes, many's the tear I've shed in the 50 years I've been going to the theater. Aunty knew every play, every piece of scenery, every actor who came on or ever had come on. She really only lived during the 9 months of the theatrical season. A summer without a summer stock company was enough to age her, while an evening at the theater that lasted till past midnight prolonged her life. She didn't say, as people did, "Now we will have spring, the stork has come," or "There's an item in the paper about the early strawberries." Instead, she announced the coming of autumn. "Have you seen that the box office is open? They'll begin the performances soon." She reckoned the value of a house and its location by its distance from the theater. She was heartbroken to have to leave the narrow alley behind the theater and move to a wide street a little farther away and live in a house where there were no neighbors opposite her. "At home, my window must be my box at the theater. You can't sit by yourself without ever seeing people. But where I live now, it seems as if I've moved way out into the country. If I want to see people, I have to go into the kitchen and climb up onto the sink. That's the only way I can see my neighbors. Now, in that old alley of mine, I could look right into the linen dealers, and then I was only 3 steps from the theater. Now, I am 3,000 steps away. A guardsman's steps. At that. Aunty might sometimes be ill, but however badly she happened to feel, she never missed the theater. One evening, her doctor ordered her to put her feet in sourdough poultices. She did as he told her, but rode off to the theater and sat there with her feet in sourdough. If she had died there, it would have pleased her. Thorvaldsen died in the theater, and she called that a blessed death. She could not imagine heaven if there were no theater there. Indeed, it was never promised to us. But it surely was conceivable that the many great actors and actresses who had gone on before would want to continue their work. Aunty had her own private wire from the theater to her room, and the telegram came every Sunday for coffee. Her private wire was Mr. Sivertson of the stage setting department. It was he who gave the signal for the raising and lowering of the curtain, the setting or striking of the scenery. From him she received a brief, expressive report of each of the plays. Shakespeare's Tempest he called detestable stuff. There's so much to set up. Why, it begins with water down to the first side drop. That is to say, the rolling billows extended far forward on the stage. On the other hand, if a play could go through 5 acts in one and the same set, he said it was sensible and well written. It was a play of rest that could play itself without all that setting up to do. In the earlier days, Aunty recalled, meaning some 30-odd years back, when she and Mr. Sivertson were indeed much younger, he was then already in the mechanical department, and, as she called him, her benefactor. At that time, it was customary at the town's big and only theater to admit spectators into the cockloft. Every stage carpenter had 1 or 2 places to dispose of. It was often filled to capacity, and with a very select company. It was said the wives of generals and councilmen had been there because it was so interesting to look down behind the scenes and see how the performers stood and moved when the curtain was down. Aunty had been there several times, to tragedies and ballets, for the productions requiring the largest casts were the most interesting to watch from the loft. You sat up there in almost complete darkness, and most people brought their suppers with them. But once 3 apples and a package of sandwiches filled with sausage fell straight down into the prison where Ugolino was about to die of hunger. The sausage produced a tremendous effect. The audience laughed and cheered, and the sausage was one of the main reasons why the management decided to forbid admission to the cockloft. But still, I've been there 37 times, said Aunty, and for that I shall always be grateful to Mr. Sivertson. On the last evening that the cockloft was open to the public, they were giving the Judgment of Solomon. Aunty could remember it so well, for from her benefactor, Mr. Sivertson, she had obtained a ticket for Agent Nob. Not that he deserved it, for he always made fun of the theater and teased her about it. But still, she had got him a seat in the cockloft. He wanted to look at the goings-on in the theater upside down. Those were his very words, and just like him, said Aunty. And so he saw the Judgment of Solomon from above and fell asleep. One would surely have thought that he had come from a big dinner and had drunk many toasts. He slept until after the theater was locked up and had to spend the whole dark night up in the loft. He had a story to tell of his waking up, but Aunty didn't believe a word of it. The Judgment of Solomon was played out, the lights were out, and all the people were out, above and below. But then began the epilogue, the real comedy, the best thing of all. According to the agent. Then life came into the properties, and it wasn't the Judgment of Solomon that was given now. No, it was Judgment Day at the theater. All this Agent Nob impudently tried to cram into Aunty. That was her thanks for getting him into the cockloft. The story the agent told was amusing enough to hear, but there were mockery and spite behind it. It was very dark up there, said the agent. But then the witchery began, the great spectacle, Judgment Day at the theater. Ticket takers were at the doors, and every spectator had to show his spiritual testimonial to decide whether he could enter free or handcuffed, and with or without a muzzle. Fine society people who came too late after the performance had begun, and young fellows who wasted their time were hitched outside. There they were muzzled and had felt soles put under their shoes to walk in on in time for the beginning of the next scene. And then they began. Judgment Day at the Theater. Purely wickedness, said Aunty, which our Lord knows nothing about. Had the scene painter wanted to get into heaven, he would have had to climb up some stairs he had painted himself, but which were too steep for anybody to use. That, of course, was because of his sin against perspective. The stage carpenter who had placed the plants and buildings in lands where they didn't belong had to move them into their proper places before cock-crowing time, if he expected to go to heaven. Mr. Knob would have to watch his own chances of getting there. And to hear what he said about the actors, both in comedy and tragedy, or in song and dance, why, it was shameful of Mr. Knob. Mr. Knob, he never deserved his place in the cockloft. Aunty didn't believe a word of what he said. He had written it all out, he said, the snob, and would have it printed, but not until he was dead and buried, since he had no wish to be skinned alive. Only once had Aunty known terror and anguish in her own temple of happiness, the theater. It was one of those gray winter days when we have only 2 hours of foggy daylight. It was cold and snowing, but Aunty was bound for the theater. They were giving Hermann von Unna, besides a little opera and a grand ballet, with prologue and epilogue. It would last well into the night. Aunty had to be there. Her lodger had lent her a pair of sleigh boots, shaggy both outside and inside, that reached all the way up her legs. Aunty arrived at the theater and was seated in a box. The boots felt warm, so she kept them on. Suddenly there arose the cry of "Fire!" as smoke rolled from one of the wings and down from the cockloft. There was a fearful panic, and people stormed out. Aunty was sitting farthest from the door. Second tier, left, hand side. From there the decorations look best, she said. They always arrange them so they will look the prettiest from the king's side of the house. Now she wanted to get out of there, but the excited people in front of her thoughtlessly slammed and jammed the door shut. There was Aunty, with no way out and no way in, for the partitions between the boxes were too high. She called for help, but nobody heard her. When she looked over at the tier beneath, she saw it was empty. The balustrade was low, and the drop wasn't very far. Her fright made her feel young and active, so she prepared to jump. She got one foot on the seat and the other over the railing. There she sat astride, well draped in her flowered skirt, with one long leg dangling below, a leg in a huge sleigh boot. That was a sight to see. And it was seen, when finally her cries were heard, and then she was easily rescued, for the fire didn't amount to much. That was the most memorable evening of her life, she said, and she was glad she hadn't seen herself, for she would have died of shame. Her benefactor in the mechanical department, Mr. E. Sivertson, came to see her regularly every Sunday, but it was a long time between Sundays. So in later years, in the middle of the week, a small child would come to her for the leavings, that is, to get her supper from the remains of Auntie's dinner. This little child was a member of the ballet who really needed the food. She played the roles of a page or a fairy, but her hardest part was the hind legs of the lion in Mozart's magic flute. She eventually grew up to become the front legs, but for this she was paid only 3 marks, while as the hind legs she had received 1 Rixdollar. She had had to creep about as the hind legs, stooping, panting for fresh air. This was very interesting to know, thought Aunty. Aunty deserved to have lived as long as the theater itself, but she couldn't hold out that long, nor did she die in the theater, but quietly and decently in her own bed. Her dying words were full of significance. She asked, "What are they playing tomorrow?" She must have left about 500 rix dollars. We came to that conclusion from the yearly rental, which amounted to 20 rix dollars. The money was left by Aunty as a legacy for some deserving old spinster who had no family. It was to be used for a seat in the second tier, left side, every Saturday, for that was when they gave the best plays. There was only one condition imposed on the legatee. As she sat in the theater every Saturday, she was to think of Aunty lying in her grave. This was Auntie's religion. The Psyche. In the fresh morning dawn, in the rosy air gleams a great star, the brightest star of the morning. His rays tremble on the white wall, as if he wished to write down on it what he can tell, what he has seen there and elsewhere during thousands of years in our rolling world. Let us hear one of his stories. A short time ago. The stars. Short time ago is called among men centuries ago. My rays followed a young artist. It was in the city of the popes, in the world city, Rome. Much has been changed there in the course of time, but the changes have not come so quickly as the change from youth to old age. Then already the palace of the Caesars was a ruin, as it is now. Fig trees and laurels grew among the fallen marble columns, and in the desolate bathing halls, where the gilding still clings to the wall. The Colosseum was a gigantic ruin. The church bells sounded, the incense sent up its fragrant cloud, and through the streets marched processions with flaming tapers and glowing canopies. Holy Church was there, and art was held as a high and holy thing. In Rome lived the greatest painter in the world, Raphael. There also dwelt the first of sculptors, Michelangelo. Even the Pope paid homage to these two and honored them with a visit. Art was recognized and honored, and was rewarded also. But, for all that, everything great and splendid was not seen and known. In a narrow lane stood an old house. Once it had been a temple. A young sculptor now dwelt there. He was young and quite unknown. He certainly had friends, young artists. Like himself, young in spirit, young in hopes and thoughts. They told him he was rich in talent and an artist, but that he was foolish for having no faith in his own power. For he always broke what he had fashioned out of clay and never completed anything. And a work must be completed if it is to be seen and to bring money. "You are a dreamer," they went on to say to him, "and that's your misfortune. But the reason of this is that you have never lived. You have never tasted life. You have never enjoyed it in great, wholesome draughts, as it ought to be enjoyed. In youth, one must mingle one's own personality with life, that they may become one. Look at the great master Raphael, whom the Pope honors and the world admires. He's no despiser of wine and bread. And he even appreciates the baker's daughter, the pretty Fornarina," added Angelo, one of the merriest of the young friends. Yes, they said a good many things of the kind, according to their age and their reason. They wanted to draw the young artist out with them into the merry, wild life, the mad life, as it might also be called. And at certain times he felt an inclination for it. He had warm blood, a strong imagination, and could take part in the merry chat and laugh aloud with the rest. But what they called Raphael's merry life disappeared before him, like a vapor, when he saw the divine radiance that beamed forth from the pictures of the great master. And when he stood in the Vatican before the forms of beauty which the masters had hewn out of marble thousands of years since, his breast swelled, and he felt within himself something high, something holy, something elevating, great, and good, and he wished that he could produce similar forms from the blocks of marble. He wished to make a picture of that which was within him, stirring upward from his heart to the realms of the infinite. But how, and in what form? The soft clay was fashioned under his fingers into forms of beauty. But the next day he broke what he had fashioned, according to his wont. One day he walked past one of those rich palaces of which Rome has many to show. He stopped before the great open portal and beheld a garden surrounded by cloistered walks. The garden bloomed with a goodly show of the fairest roses. Great white lilies with green, juicy leaves shot upward from the marble basin in which the clear water was splashing. And a form glided past, the daughter of the princely house, graceful, delicate, and wonderfully fair. Such a form of female loveliness he had never before beheld. Yet stay. He had seen it, painted by Raphael, painted as a Psyche, in one of the Roman palaces. Yes, there it had been painted, but here it passed by him in living reality. The remembrance lived in his thoughts, in his heart. He went home to his humble room and modeled a Psyche of clay. It was the rich, young Roman girl, the noble maiden, and for the first time he looked at his work with satisfaction. It had a meaning for him, for it was she, and the friends who saw his work shouted aloud for joy. They declared that this work was a manifestation of his artistic power, of which they had long been aware, and that now the world should be made aware of it too. The clay figure was lifelike and beautiful, but it had not the whiteness or the durability of marble. So they declared that the Psyche must henceforth live in marble. He already possessed a costly block of that stone. It had been lying for years, the property of his parents, in the courtyard. Fragments of glass, climbing weeds, and remains of artichokes had gathered about it and sullied its purity. But under the surface, the block was as white as the mountain snow. And from this block, the Psyche was to arise. Now it happened one morning. The bright star tells nothing about this, but we know it occurred. That a noble Roman company came into the narrow lane. The carriage stopped at the top of the lane, and the company proceeded on foot towards the house to inspect the young sculptor's work, for they had heard him spoken of by chance. And who were these distinguished guests? Poor young man, or fortunate young man he might be called. The noble young lady stood in the room and smiled radiantly when her father said to her, "It is your living image." That smile could not be copied, any more than the look could be reproduced, the wonderful look which she cast upon the young artist. It was a fiery look that seemed at once to elevate and to crush him. The Psyche must be executed in marble, said the wealthy patrician. And those were words of life for the dead clay and the heavy block of marble, and words of life, likewise, for the deeply moved artist. "When the work is finished, I will purchase it," continued the rich noble. A new era seemed to have arisen in the poor studio. Life and cheerfulness gleamed there, and busy industry plied its work. The beaming morning star beheld how the work progressed. The clay itself seemed inspired since she had been there, and molded itself in heightened beauty to a likeness of the well-known features. "Now I know what life is," cried the artist rejoicingly. "It is love. It is the lofty abandonment of self for the dawning of the beautiful in the soul. What my friends call life and enjoyment is a passing shadow. It is like bubbles among seething dregs, not the pure heavenly wine that consecrates us to life." The marble block was reared in its place, The chisel struck great fragments from it. The measurements were taken, points and lines were made. The mechanical part was executed, till gradually the stone assumed a human female form, a shape of beauty, and became converted into the Psyche, fair and glorious, a divine being in human shape. The heavy stone appeared as a gliding, dancing, airy Psyche, with the heavenly, innocent smile. The smile that had mirrored itself in the soul of the young artist. The star of the roseate dawn beheld and understood what was stirring within the young man, and could read the meaning of the changing color of his cheek, of the light that flashed from his eye, as he stood busily working, reproducing what had been put into his soul from above. "Thou art a master like those masters among the ancient Greeks," exclaimed his delighted friends. "Soon shall the whole world admire thy Psyche." "My Psyche," he repeated. "Yes, mine. She must be mine. I, too, am an artist, like those great men who are gone. Providence has granted me the boon, and has made me the equal of that lady of noble birth." And he knelt down and breathed a prayer of thankfulnesses to heaven. And then he forgot heaven for her sake, for the sake of her picture in stone, for her Psyche, which stood there as if formed of snow, blushing in the morning dawn. He was to see her in reality, the living, graceful Psyche, whose words sounded like music in his ears. He could now carry the news into the rich palace that the marble Psyche was finished. He betook himself thither, strode through the open courtyard where the waters ran splashing from the dolphin's jaws into the marble basins, where the snowy lilies and the fresh roses bloomed in abundance. He stepped into the great, lofty hall, whose walls and ceilings shone with gilding and bright colors and heraldic devices. Gaily dressed serving men, adorned with trappings like sleigh horses, walked to and fro, and some reclined at their ease upon the carved oak seats, as if they were the masters of the house. He told them what had brought him to the palace, and was conducted up the shining marble staircase, covered with soft carpets and adorned with many a statue. Then he went on through richly furnished chambers, over mosaic floors, amid gorgeous pictures. All this pomp and luxury seemed to weary him, but soon he felt relieved, for the princely old master of the house received him most graciously, almost heartily. And when he took his leave, he was requested to step into the signora's apartment, for she, too, wished to see him. The servants led him through more luxurious halls and chambers into her room, where she appeared the chief and leading ornament. She spoke to him. No hymn of supplication, no holy chant could melt his soul like the sound of her voice. He took her hand and lifted it to his lips. No rose was softer, but a fire thrilled through him from this rose. A feeling of power came upon him, and words poured from his tongue. He knew not what he said. Does the crater of the volcano know that the glowing lava is pouring from it? He confessed what he felt for her. She stood before him, astonished, offended, proud, with contempt in her face, an expression of disgust, as if she had suddenly touched a cold, unclean reptile. Her cheeks reddened, her lips grew white, and her eyes flashed fire, though they were dark as the blackness of night. "Madman!" she cried. "Away! Begone!" And she turned her back upon him. Her beautiful face wore an expression like that of the stony countenance with the snaky locks. Like a stricken, fainting man, he tottered down the staircase and out into the street. Like a man walking in his sleep, he found his way back to his dwelling. Then he woke up to madness and agony, and seized his hammer, swung it high in the air, and rushed forward to shatter the beautiful marble image. But, in his pain, he had not noticed that his friend Angelo stood beside him, and Angelo held back his arm with a strong grasp, crying, "Are you mad? What are you about?" They struggled together. Angelo was the stronger, and with a deep sigh of exhaustion, the young artist threw himself into a chair. "What has happened?" asked Angelo. "Command yourself. Speak." But what could he say? How could he explain? And as Angelo could make no sense of his friend's incoherent words, he forbore to question him further, and merely said, "Your blood grows thick from your eternal dreaming. Be a man as all others are, and don't go on living in ideals, for that is what drives men crazy. A jovial feast will make you sleep quietly and happily. Believe me, the time will come when you will be old, and your sinews will shrink. And then, on some fine, sunshiny day, when everything is laughing and rejoicing, you will lie there a faded plant that will grow no more. I do not live in dreams, but in reality. Come with me. Be a man." And he drew the artist away with him. At this moment he was able to do so, for a fire ran in the blood of the young sculptor. A change had taken place in his soul. He felt a longing to tear from the old, the accustomed, to forget, if possible, his own individuality, and therefore it was that he followed Angelo. In an out-of-the-way suburb of Rome lay a tavern much visited by artists. It was built on the ruins of some ancient baths. The great yellow citrons hung down among the dark, shining leaves and covered a part of the old, reddish-yellow walls. The tavern consisted of a vaulted chamber, almost like a cavern, in the ruins. A lamp burned there before the picture of the Madonna. A great fire gleamed on the hearth, and roasting and boiling was going on there. Without, under the citron trees and laurels, stood a few covered tables. The two artists were received by their friends with shouts of welcome. Little was eaten, but much was drunk, and the spirits of the company rose. Songs were sung, and ditties were played on the guitar. Presently the saltarello sounded, and the merry dance began. Two young Roman girls, who sat as models to the artists, took part in the dance and in the festivity. Two charming bacchantes were they, certainly not Psyches, not delicate, beautiful roses, but fresh, hearty, glowing carnations. How hot it was on that day! Even after sundown it was hot. There was fire in the blood, fire in every glance, fire everywhere. The air gleamed with gold and roses, and life seemed like gold and roses. "At last you have joined us for once," said his friends. "Now let yourself be carried by the waves within and around you." Never yet have I felt so well, so merry," cried the young artist. "You are right. You are all of you right. I was a fool, a dreamer. Man belongs to reality, and not to fancy." With songs and with sounding guitars, the young people returned that evening from the tavern through the narrow streets. The two glowing carnations, daughters of the Campagna, went with them. In Angelo's room, among a litter of colored sketches, studies, and glowing pictures, the voices sounded mellower, but not less merrily. On the ground lay many a sketch that resembled the daughters of the Campagna in their fresh, hearty comeliness, but the two originals were far handsomer than their portraits. All the burners of the six-armed lamp flared and flamed, and the human flamed up from within and appeared in the glare as if it were divine. "Apollo, Jupiter, I feel myself raised to our heaven, to your glory. I feel as if the blossom of life were unfolding itself in my veins at this moment. Yes, the blossom unfolded itself, and then burst and fell, and an evil vapor arose from it, blinding the sight, leading astray the fancy. The firework of the senses went out, and it became dark. He was again in his own room. There he sat down on his bed and collected his thoughts. "Fie on thee!" These were the words that sounded out of his mouth from the depths of his heart. "Wretched man, go, be gone!" And a deep, painful sigh burst from his bosom. "Away, be gone!" These, her words, the words of the living Psyche, echoed through his heart, escaped from his lips. He buried his head in the pillows, his thoughts grew confused, and he fell asleep. In the morning dawn, he started up and collected his thoughts anew. What had happened? Had all the past been a dream? The visit to her, the feast at the tavern, the evening with the purple carnations of the Campagna? No, it was all real, a reality he had never before experienced. In the purple air gleamed the bright star, and its beams fell upon him and upon the marble Psyche. He trembled as he looked at that picture of immortality, and his glance seemed impure to him. He threw the cloth over the statue and then touched it once more to unveil the form. But he was not able to look again at his own work. Gloomy, quiet, absorbed in his own thoughts, he sat there through the long day. He heard nothing of what was going on around him, and no man guessed what was passing in this human soul. And days and weeks went by, but the nights passed more slowly than the days. The flashing star beheld him one morning as he rose, pale and trembling with fever, from his sad couch. Then he stepped towards the statue, threw back the covering, took one long, sorrowful gaze at his work, and then, almost sinking beneath the burden, he dragged the statue out into the garden. In that place was an old, dry well, now nothing but a hole. Into this he cast the Psyche, threw earth in above her, and covered up the spot with twigs and nettles. "Away, be gone!" Such was the short epitaph he spoke. The star beheld all this from the pink morning sky, and its beam trembled upon two great tears upon the pale, feverish cheeks of the young man. And soon it was said that he was sick unto death, and he lay stretched upon a bed of pain. The convent brother Ignatius visited him as a physician and a friend, and brought him words of comfort, of religion, and spoke to him of the peace and happiness of the church, of the sinfulness of man, of rest and mercy to be found in heaven. And the words fell like warm sunbeams upon a teeming soil. The soil smoked and sent up clouds of mist, fantastic pictures, pictures in which there was reality. And from these floating islands, he looked across at human life. He found it vanity and delusion, and vanity and delusion it had been to him. They told him that art was a sorcerer, betraying us to vanity and to earthly lusts, that we are false to ourselves, unfaithful to our friends, unfaithful towards heaven, and that the serpent was always repeating within us, "Eat, and thou shalt become as God." And it appeared to him as if now, for the first time, he knew himself, and had found the way that leads to truth and to peace. In the church was the light and the brightness of God. In the monk's cell, he should find the rest through which the tree of human life might grow on into eternity. Brother Ignatius strengthened his longings, and the determination became firm within him. A child of the world became a servant of the church. The young artist renounced the world and retired into the cloister. The brothers came forward affectionately to welcome him, and his inauguration was as a Sunday feast. Heaven seemed to him to dwell in the sunshine of the church, and to beam upon him from the holy pictures and from the cross. And when, in the evening, at the sunset hour, he stood in his little cell, and, opening the window, looked out upon old Rome, upon the desolated temples, and the great dead Colosseum, when he saw all this in its spring garb, when the acacias bloomed, and the ivy was fresh, and roses burst forth everywhere, and the citron and orange were in the height of their beauty, and the palm trees waved their branches. Then he felt a deeper emotion than had ever yet thrilled through him. The quiet open campagna spread itself forth towards the blue snow-covered mountains, which seemed to be painted in the air, all the outlines melting into each other, breathing peace and beauty, floating, dreaming, and all appearing like a dream. Yes, this world was a dream, and the dream lasts for hours, and may return for hours. But convent life is a life of years, long years, and many years. From within comes much that renders men sinful and impure. He fully realized the truth of this, what flames arose up in him at times, what a source of evil, of that which we would not, welled up continually. He mortified his body, but the evil came from within. One day, after the lapse of many years, he met Angelo, who recognized him. "Man," exclaimed Angelo, "yes, it is thou. Art thou happy now? Thou hast sinned against God, and cast away his boon from thee, hast neglected thy mission in this world. Read the parable of the entrusted talent. The master, who spoke that parable, spoke the truth. What hast thou gained? What hast thou found? Dost thou not fashion for thyself a religion and a dreamy life after thine own idea, as almost all do? Suppose all this is a dream, a fair delusion." "Get thee away from me, Satan," said the monk, and he quitted Angelo. "There is a devil, a personal devil. This day I have seen him," said the monk to himself. "Once I extended a finger to him, and he took my whole hand. But now," he sighed, "the evil is within me, and it is in yonder man. But it does not bow him down. He goes abroad with head erect, and enjoys his comfort. And I grasped at comfort in the consolations of religion. If it were nothing but a consolation? Supposing everything here were, like the world I have quitted, only a beautiful fancy, a delusion like the beauty of the evening clouds, like the misty blue of the distant hills. When you approach them, they are very different. O eternity, thou actest like the great calm ocean that beckons us and fills us with expectation, and when we embark upon thee, we sink, disappear, and cease to be. Delusion, away with it, begone." And tearless, but sunk in bitter reflection, he sat upon his hard couch, and then knelt down. Before whom? Before the stone cross fastened to the wall? No, it was only habit that made him take this position. The more deeply he looked into his own heart, the blacker did the darkness seem. Nothing within, nothing without, this life squanderied and cast away. And this thought rolled and grew like a snowball until it seemed to crush him. I can confide my griefs to none. I may speak to none of the gnawing worm within. My secret is my prisoner. If I let the captive escape, I shall be his. And the godlike power that dwelt within him suffered and strove. "O Lord, my Lord," he cried in his despair, "be merciful and grant me faith. I threw away the gift thou hadst vouchsafed to me. I left my mission unfulfilled. I lacked strength, and strength thou didst not give me. Immortality, the Psyche in my breast. Away with it. It shall be buried like that Psyche, the best gleam of my life. Never will it arise out of its grave. The star glowed in the roseate air, the star that shall surely be extinguished and pass away while the soul still lives on. Its trembling beam fell upon the white wall, but it wrote nothing there upon being made perfect in God, nothing of the hope of mercy, of the reliance on the divine love that thrills through the heart of the believer. The psyche within can never die. Shall it live in consciousness? Can the incomprehensible happen? Yes, yes, my being is incomprehensible. Thou art unfathomable, O Lord. Thy whole world is incomprehensible, a wonder-work of power, of glory, and of love. His eyes gleamed, and then closed in death. The tolling of the church bell was the last sound that echoed above him, above the dead man. And they buried him, covering him with earth that had been brought from Jerusalem, and in which was mingled the dust of many of the pious dead. When years had gone by, his skeleton was dug up, as the skeletons of the monks who had died before him had been. It was clad in a brown frock. A rosary was put into the bony hand, and the form was placed among the ranks of other skeletons in the cloisters of the convent. And the sun shone without, while within the censers were waved and the Mass was celebrated. And years rolled by. The bones fell asunder and became mingled with others. Skulls were piled up till they formed an outer wall around the church, and there lay also his head in the burning sun, for many dead were there, and no one knew their names, and his name was forgotten also. And see, something was moving in the sunshine, in the sightless, cavernous eyes. What might that be? A sparkling lizard moved about in the skull, gliding in and out through the sightless holes. The lizard now represented all the life left in that head, in which once great thoughts, bright dreams, the love of art and of the glorious had arisen, whence hot tears had rolled down, where hope and immortality had had their being. The lizard sprang away and disappeared, and the skull itself crumbled to pieces and became dust among dust. Centuries passed away. The bright star gleamed unaltered, radiant and large, as it had gleamed for thousands of years, and the air glowed red with tints fresh as roses, crimson like blood. There, where once had stood the narrow lane containing the ruins of the temple, a nunnery was now built. A grave was being dug in the convent garden for a young nun who had died and was to be laid in the earth this morning. The spade struck against a hard substance. It was a stone that shone dazzling white. A block of marble soon appeared. A rounded shoulder was laid bare, and now the spade was plied with a more careful hand, and presently a female head was seen, and butterflies' wings. Out of the grave in which the young nun was to be laid, they lifted, in the rosy morning, a wonderful statue of a Psyche carved in white marble. "How beautiful, how perfect it is," cried the spectators, "a relic of the best period of art." And who could the sculptor have been? No one knew, no one remembered him, except the bright star that had gleamed for thousands of years. The star had seen the course of that life on earth, and knew of the man's trials, of his weakness. In fact, that he had been but human. The man's life had passed away. His dust had been scattered abroad as dust is destined to be. But the result of his noblest striving, the glorious work that gave token of the divine element within him, the psyche that never dies, that lives beyond posterity, the brightness even of this earthly psyche remained here, after him, and was seen and acknowledged and appreciated. The bright morning star in the roseate air threw its glancing ray downward upon the psyche, and upon the radiant countenances of the admiring spectators, who here beheld the image of the soul portrayed in marble. What is earthly will pass away and be forgotten, and the star in the vast firmament knows it. What is heavenly will shine brightly through posterity, and when the ages of posterity are past, the psyche, the soul, will still live on. The Bishop of Börglum and his men. We are up in Jutland, near the wild marsh. We can hear the North Sea, hear it tossing about, for it is quite close by. Before us there rises a great sand dune. We have been looking at it for a long while, and we've been, and still are, driving toward it, very slowly, through the deep sand. On the top of this sand dune is an old rambling building, the Börglum Monastery, the largest wing of which is the church. We arrive there in the late evening, but the air is clear and the night is bright, so we can enjoy an expansive view over meadow and moor as far as the Aalborg Fjord, over field and heath, out over the dark blue sea. Now that we are up there, we drive on through barn and shed, then turn through the gates and on into the old castle court, where the linden trees stand in a row along the walls. Sheltered from wind and weather, they thrive here, and their leafy branches almost hide the windows. We climb up the winding stone staircase. We then walk through the long corridors, beneath raftered ceilings. The wind whistles so strangely here, whether outside or inside. One doesn't quite know where the sounds come from. And then one tells stories. Yes, a person tells and sees so many things when he is frightened or wants to frighten others. The old dead monks, one says, glide silently past us and into the church, where the wind rushes through and seems to us to be singing mass for their souls. This brings strange thoughts to one, thoughts that carry us back into the olden times. There is a stranded ship on the coast, and the bishop's men are active there on the beach. While the ocean has spared some of the voyagers, these men spare none. The water will wash away all trace of crimson blood that has flowed from broken skulls. The stranded goods, and there are many, all belong to the bishop. The waves have washed up the anchor, and barrels filled with fine wines for the cellar of the monks, where there is already a full supply of ale and mead. There is also a plenitude of poultry, sausages, and ham in their kitchen, and in the ponds outside are fat bass and delicious carp. The Bishop of Börglum is a man of power. He owns much land, and yet he wants to acquire more. All must bow before him, Olaf Glob. A wealthy kinsman of his, at Thai, has just died. The widow will find Olaf Glob neither kin nor kind to her. Her late husband ruled the whole district, with the exception of the church properties. Her son is in a foreign land, having been sent away at his own wish, when no more than a boy, to learn foreign customs. For years no word has come from him. He may be in his grave, and may never return home to take over the rule that now his mother must assume. What? Shall a woman rule? Says the bishop. He summons her into the courts, but for what gain? She has broken no law. Right and justice are on her side. Bishop Olaf of Börglum, what are you pondering over? What are you writing on that white parchment? What is it that you now conceal under band and seal, and then give to a knight and his servant, who ride off with it, out of the country, far away to the city of the Pope? The time of the falling leaves, the season of storms and wrecks is past, and now icy winter comes. Twice it has come with no tidings from abroad. But now, finally, with its return, the knight and his servant ride back from Rome, bearing a papal ban against the widow who dared oppose the pious bishop. A curse upon her, and all that is hers. Cast out is she from church and congregation. None shall dare lend her a helping hand. Friends and kinfolk alike must shun her as a plague and pestilence. "What will not bend must break," said the bishop. "The people all forsake her, yet she is steadfast in her trust in God, who alone will be her strength and bulwark. Only one servant, an elderly maid, remains faithful to her. Together they guide the plow over fields where the corn flourishes, though the land has been cursed. You child of hell, I shall yet carry out my purpose," says the Bishop of Börglum. "Now I summon you before the tribunal that will condemn you." Then the widow harnesses her last 2 oxen to her carriage, and she and her faithful servant drive away across the heath out of the land of Denmark. Now she is a stranger among strangers, where a strange tongue is spoken, and where foreign customs prevail. Far away, where the green hills rise into mountains, and where the vineyards grow. Traveling peddlers pass her, carefully guarding their loaded wagons, in deadly fear of attack from robber barons. But the 2 poor women, in their humble cart drawn by the black oxen, may pass in safety along the dangerous roads and through the dense forests. Now they are in France, and they meet a gallant knight followed by 12 men-at-arms. The knight pauses and looks at the strange wagon, and then asks the younger of the women what country they have come from and what their journey's destination is. She explains that they are from Thai. In Denmark tells of her cares and misery, but these all seem to come to an end. Our Lord has guided them together. The stranger knight is her son. He holds out his arms and embraces her, and the poor mother weeps, which she has not been able to do for many years, but rather has bitten her lips until blood has come forth. It is the time of the falling leaves, the season of wrecks. The ocean washes ashore filled wine casks for the bishop's cellars. In his kitchen, the wild venison is roasting. It is pleasant and warm within doors, though winter freezes without. But news is brought. Jens Glob has returned to Thai with his mother. Jens Glob summons the bishop into court to demand their lands and rights. "Much good that will do him," said the bishop. "Spare your efforts, Sir Jens." Another year passes. Again the time of the falling leaves returns. The season of wrecks. Icy winter follows, and the white bees swarm about and sting one's face until they melt. It is sharp weather today, say people who have ventured out into it. Jens Glob stands close to his fire, lost in thought. He singes his mantle, burns a hole in it unawares. "I will master you yet, Bishop of Börglum. You are safe from the law, sheltered by the mantle of the Pope, but not safe from Jens Glob." He writes to his brother-in-law, Sir Oluf Hase of Salling, bidding him meet him Christmas Eve at Mass in Vidberg Church. The bishop must leave Börglum and come to Thailand to read the Mass there. This Jens Glob knows. Meadow and moorland are buried beneath ice and snow, and across them speeds a cavalcade of horse and riders. The bishop, his clerks, his squires, they take the shortcut among the waving reeds, where the wind sings its melancholy song. Blow your brazen trumpet, you trumpeter dressed in foxskin. It sounds sharply in the clear air. They ride on over heath and moorland, where in the warm summertime Fata Morgana decks her magic bowers. On they ride, to the south, toward Vidberg Church. The wind blows his trumpet, too, blows it louder and louder, creating a storm, a terrible storm, that continues to grow in force. On through the storm, toward the church, they ride. The house of God stands firm, but the storm drives on over field and moorland, over fjord and ocean. The bishop reaches the church, but Sir Olaf Hase can scarcely do so, however hard he rides. He reaches the opposite side of the fjord with his men, whom Jens Glob has summoned to aid him in calling the bishop to account. The church is the courthouse. The altar is the council table. The candles in the heavy brass candlesticks are all burning. Outside, the storm screams out the accusation and the sentence. The wind rushes through the air, over moorland and heath, over the rolling billows. No ferryboat can cross the fjord in such weather. Oluf Hase is held at Ottesund. He dismisses his men, bids them keep his horse and armor, and take his farewell to his wife, for alone will he risk his life in the roaring waters. They will be his witnesses that it is not his fault if Jens Glob stands alone in Vidberg Church. But his faithful warriors will not leave him. They will follow him even into the raging waters. 10 of them are swept away by the torrent. Oluf Hase and the 2 youngest reach the opposite shore in safety and have still 4 miles to ride. It is past midnight, Christmas Eve. The wind has died down. The church is lighted up, the light shining from the windows over meadow and heath. The service is ended, and the house of God is so still that the wax can be heard dripping from the candles to the stone floor. Now, at last Oluf Hase arrives. Jens Glob meets him in the forecourt, saying, "God day, the bishop and I are reconciled now." "Are you indeed?" says Oluf. "Then neither you nor the bishop shall leave this church alive." His sword flashes from its scabbard and splits in 2 the wooden door of the church, which Jens has closed between them. "Hold back, dear brother-in-law. First see what sort of reconciliation this is. I have slain the bishop and all his men. Not one of them will do evil again, and we need say nothing more of the wrongs done my mother." The altar lights burn red, but redder is the stain that shines from the church door. There, lying in blood, is the bishop, with a cloven skull, and lying dead around him are his men. It is quiet and calm on the holy eve of Christmas. The 3rd evening after Christmas, funeral bells in Börglum convent. The murdered bishop and his slain men lie in state beneath a black canopy, lighted by candelabras swathed in crape. The once mighty lord is a corpse, robed in a silver-bordered mantle, with the crozier in his powerless hand. Incense fills the air as the monks chant a funeral dirge. It sounds like a sentence of wrath and condemnation, and may be heard over the whole countryside as it is carried along and wailed by the wind. Sometimes the accusing voice sinks to rest for a while, but it never dies out completely. It always rises again, carrying its dismal strains late into our own century, singing of the cruel Bishop of Börglum and his wicked men. On many a dark night, the terrified peasant, driving along the heavy sandy road past Börglum convent, hears it, and the sleepless listener within Börglum's thick walls hears it too. The church entrance has long been walled up, but superstitious eyes still see the door there, opening before them. The candles in the church brass crowns shine, and the church is revealed in its former splendor, rich with the smoke of incense, while the monks still sing the funeral mass for the murdered bishop. He lies there in his silver-bordered robe, the crozier in his powerless hand, the bloody wound shining as red as fire from his pale, proud forehead. There are the worldly mind and evil passions that burned. Sink into the grave, into the night of oblivion, you dismal memories of the olden days. Listen to the voice of the wind, sweeping over the rolling sea. Out there a storm is raging, and will take many lives. For the sea has not changed its nature, because the times have changed. Tonight it is all mouths to devour. Tomorrow perhaps it will be as clear as a mirror, just as it was in the olden times we have now buried. Sleep calmly if you can. Now it is morning. The new day brings sunshine into the room. But the wind still blows, and there is news of a wreck, as in the olden times. Last night, down by Lucken, the little red-roofed fishing village visible from our windows, a ship was wrecked, but by the use of a rocket apparatus, a line was cast ashore, and a bridge made between the wreck and the mainland. All on board were saved and brought to land, and beds were found for them. Today they are going to Börglum convent. There they will find warm hospitality, be sheltered in comfortable rooms, see friendly eyes, and hear kindly voices speaking their own language. The piano will sound for them with melodies of their native land, and before these have died away, a chord of another sort will be struck. Soundless and yet full of sound and certainty, the telegraph wire will reach the homes of the shipwrecked in a foreign land and tell of their safety. Then, with their minds at ease, they will join in the dancing at the feast given in the hall at Börglum. Waltzes and folk dances will be danced, and songs will be sung about Denmark and her valiant soldier in our time. Blessed be you, our new age. Let a fresh and pure summer breeze sweep through the towns. Send your sun rays into our hearts and minds. Let them erase the dark traditions of the cruel days of old. What the old man does is always right. I will tell you a story, one that was first told to me when I was a very small boy. It has followed me ever since, like a quiet melody that grows sweeter with time. Every time I recall it, the tale seems more delightful, more full of sunlight and wisdom. For stories, like good wine and kind people, often become better as they grow older. You have surely wandered through the countryside before and seen an ancient farmhouse standing by a dusty lane. One of those humble, weathered houses, whose walls lean slightly with age, whose roof is heavy with thatch. Moss and tiny plants creep freely over the roof's ridges, and right upon the gable there rests a stork's nest. Yes, a stork, for what would a proper farmhouse be without one? The walls are rough and gray, the windows low and small, and only one of them can even be opened. The baking oven juts boldly from the wall like a great rounded knob, and beside the paling grows an old elder tree that casts gentle shade over a little pond where a few ducks paddle, wagging their tails in cheerful laziness. A shaggy yard dog keeps guard there too, barking at every passer-by as though the whole world were his concern. Such was the farmhouse that stood along the narrow country road, and in that house lived an old peasant and his wife. They possessed little, hardly enough to call wealth, but they owned something they could not live without. An old horse, faithful and lean, who found its meals by nibbling the grass that grew along the roadside. Upon this horse, the old man would ride into town, and the neighbors often borrowed it from him. For the favor, they paid in kind, a bit of help here, a small service there. And so life went on contentedly. But one day, as the years crept onward, the old couple thought that perhaps the time had come to sell the horse, or better still, to exchange it for something more useful. What might that be? They wondered. "You'll know best, old man," said the wife, kindly and confident. "It's fair day today. Ride into town and see what you can do. Whether you sell it for money or make a trade, I'll be satisfied. Whatever you decide will be the right thing." She tied his neckerchief neatly for him, for her hands were steadier than his. She smoothed the brim of his hat with her palm, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and wished him luck. Then the old man mounted the horse that was soon to be sold or bartered, and he trotted down the sunny road. The sun blazed fiercely in a cloudless sky, and the road was alive with travelers heading to the fair. Wagons creaked, carts rolled, and people walked or rode, all stirring up thick dust that glittered in the light. As he rode along, the old man came upon a peasant trudging beside a fine brown cow. "A handsome beast," thought the old man. "She looks gentle and strong, and she would give good milk for sure. That would be a fine exchange indeed, a cow for my horse. She'd serve us better than an animal that only eats. Hullo there," he called. "You with the cow. I dare say a horse is worth more than a cow, but what of that? A cow will be more use to me. Shall we trade?" The other man was willing at once, and so the bargain was made. The old man now had a cow and walked beside her contentedly. He might well have turned back home, for his errand was done, but he had set his heart on visiting the fair, even if only to see it. And so onward he went. After a little while he overtook a fellow driving a fat sheep along the road. Its fleece was thick and shining in the sun. "That's a fine animal," thought the old man. "Plenty of grass at home for him, and in winter he could stay right in our cottage. Yes, that would be better still. Shall I trade again?" The man with the sheep agreed without hesitation, and soon the old man was leading the sheep along, pleased with himself and humming a little tune. Before long he met another traveler, a man coming out from a field carrying a large white goose under his arm. "That's a plump one," said the old man aloud. "Look at those feathers and that fat breast. My old woman would be glad indeed to see such a goose. She's often said, 'If only we had a goose.' And here is my chance. Friend, shall we exchange? My sheep for your goose, and I'll thank you kindly besides." The bargain was quickly struck, and the old man continued on his way with the goose tucked under his arm. By this time, he was near the town. The road had grown crowded with all manner of creatures and people, cows lowing, pigs squealing, men shouting, children laughing. Near the toll gate, the crowd thickened so much that even the cattle pushed through into the toll keeper's garden, where a small fowl strutted about with a string tied to its leg. The bird's tail was short, its eyes sharp and knowing, and it clucked in a curious way. Cluck, cluck, as though it had a secret to tell. "What a fine fowl that is," thought the peasant. "Finer even than our parson's best hen. A fowl can feed itself almost anywhere, scratching up a living from the smallest scraps. That would be just the thing for us. If I could exchange my goose for that fowl, I'd be content indeed." The toll keeper was amused and agreed, and the exchange was made. The old man now carried the fowl, proud of his day's work, though he had not yet reached the fair at all. Feeling warm and weary, he decided to rest at an inn. Just as he reached the door, the ostler came out carrying a heavy sack. "What have you there?" asked the old man. "Rotten apples," said the ostler. "A full sack of them, for the pigs." "Rotten apples," said the old man, brightening. "Why, that would please my old woman mightily. Last year our apple tree bore just one fruit, and she treasured it till it shriveled away. She said, 'Property is property, even if it's only an apple.' Think how pleased she'll be when I bring her a whole sackful." "What will you give for it?" asked the ostler. "Well," said the peasant, "I'll give you my fowl." The exchange was made, and he set the sack carefully near the stove inside the inn. But the stove was hot, and soon the apples began to sizzle, and hiss. The room filled with travelers, horse dealers, cattlemen, and 2 English gentlemen with pockets so heavy with gold that they bulged at the seams. When the old man told them his tale, how he had traded the horse for a cow, the cow for a sheep, the sheep for a goose, the goose for a fowl, and the fowl for a sack of apples, they laughed and said, "Your wife will scold you soundly when you get home." "Scold me?" said the peasant, smiling. "Not she. She'll kiss me and say, 'What the old man does is always right.'" "Shall we wager on it?" said one Englishman. £100 in gold that she'll give you a tongue lashing instead." "A bushel of apples against your gold," said the old man, "and I'll throw myself and my old woman in to fill the measure." The wager was made, and soon a carriage was brought round. Off they went, the 2 Englishmen and the peasant, bumping along the lane until they reached the old farmhouse. "Good evening, old woman," said the husband cheerily. "Good evening, old man," she answered. "Well, did you sell the horse?" "I made an exchange," said he, "and a fine one at that. I got a cow for it." "Thank heaven!" cried the wife. "Now we'll have milk and butter and cheese. That was wisely done." "Yes, but I changed the cow for a sheep." "Even better," she said, clapping her hands. "The cow eats too much, and the sheep will give us wool besides, jackets and stockings. Wonderful! But I traded the sheep for a goose." "Then we shall feast this year," said the old woman, laughing. "You always think of me. Roast goose, just imagine." And then I gave the goose for a fowl. "That's splendid," she said. "A fowl lays eggs, and from eggs come chickens. A fine poultry yard we'll have." "And finally," said he, "I exchanged the fowl for a sack of apples." "For that," she cried, "you deserve a kiss." And she gave him one at once. "You know, this morning I went to borrow some herbs from the schoolmaster's wife, and she said scornfully that she hadn't even a shriveled apple to lend. Now I can lend her 10, a whole sackful. Oh, that makes me laugh for joy." Geez, the Englishmen stared in wonder. "Always trading downward and always happy," they said. "That is worth every penny." And they paid the peasant his 100 weight of gold. So the story proves true. It always pays best when a wife believes in her husband, and when love is richer than gold. That is the story I heard when I was a child. And now you have heard it too. And you know that indeed, whatever the old man does is always right. The Moneybox. In a wide and cheerful nursery, where daylight often spilled through the curtains and toys lay scattered like tiny monuments of a forgotten kingdom, there stood, upon the very top of a towering wardrobe, a clay figure in the shape of a pig. It was not an ordinary pig, mind you, but a money pig, a noble creation of the potter's art, baked to a rosy hue and polished until its rounded sides gleamed faintly in the sun. Upon its back was a narrow slit, carefully cut, through which pennies, shillings, and on fortunate occasions, even bright silver crown pieces had been dropped. So eager had its little owners been that the slit had been widened with a penknife, and now it could swallow coins of almost any size. Inside, the pig was full, so full that when gently shaken, it no longer rattled, which, as everyone knows, is the highest and proudest state a money pig can attain. From his lofty perch, he surveyed the nursery world below, the rocking horse with his faded mane, the painted soldiers standing in stiff formation, the dolls with their bright yet lifeless eyes, and the wooden blocks stacked like ruined towers. To the pig, they were all trifles. He knew, oh, how well he knew, that within his round belly rested enough money to buy every toy in the room, and this thought filled him with a grave and swelling pride. He looked down upon them all, as though he were a banker gazing from the window of his marble office upon the humble folk in the street. The other toys were not blind to his importance. They said nothing, of course, for it was not considered polite to mention such matters, but each felt it in silence. The big doll, for instance, still handsome though somewhat faded by years of play, lay half hidden in an open drawer of the cabinet. Her neck had been broken and carefully mended with glue, leaving a pale seam that she covered modestly with a ribbon. She looked out at the others and called in her high, pleasant voice, "Let us play at being men and women. That is something worth doing." This suggestion caused a ripple of excitement throughout the nursery. Even the old engravings hanging on the wall seemed to tremble within their frames, as if they too wished to join in the fun. They turned slightly, showing their gray, unpolished backs to the room, something they would never have done deliberately, for pictures, like people, prefer to show their best side. It was late, so late that the children of the house were fast asleep, but the full moon poured her silver light through the window panes, giving them a brightness that cost nothing at all. It was, as the toy wagon said, light at a very cheap rate. Every toy that could move or speak was invited to join the game. Even the wagon, a rough and heavy thing usually left for outdoor play, rolled forward proudly. "Each of us has value," it said in a deep, wooden voice. "We cannot all be noblemen. Some must work, or else nothing will move." The money pig, being the highest and most dignified of them all, was the only one to receive a written invitation. A verbal message, the others thought, might seem disrespectful to such an eminent personage. The letter was written on a torn bit of picture book page, folded neatly, and carried up by the jumping jack. When it reached him, the money pig nodded grandly and sent his reply through the same messenger. "If I am to take part," he said, "it must be from my own home. I do not descend. Arrange matters accordingly." So they did. The little toy theater was brought forward and positioned so that the pig, from his high throne, could look directly into it. The curtain, a scrap of old silk, was drawn. The stage lamps, made of marbles wrapped in foil, were lit, and the audience took their places. Some proposed beginning with a cheerful comedy, while others wished for a tea party and an intellectual discussion afterward. The decision was made to start with the discussion, for they felt it more dignified. The rocking horse spoke first, talking of races and the proper training of young riders. The wagon rumbled about railways and steam power, for such were matters of his craft. The clock upon the mantel chimed in with politics, ticking pompously and declaring that he alone knew what time it truly was, though it was whispered behind his back that he often ran slow. The bamboo cane standing in the corner was too proud to speak. He only glimmered with vanity, polishing his silver top against his brass ferrule. Two embroidered cushions on the sofa sighed quietly, being too pretty and too foolish to think of anything to say. Then the play began. The little marionettes danced upon the stage, their painted faces gleaming under the candlelight. Every toy watched breathlessly. They were told to applaud when pleased, to stamp, to rattle, or to crack if delighted. "I only crack for the young and lively," said the riding whip disdainfully. "Old people bore me." "I crack for everyone," shouted the Christmas cracker proudly. "Yes, "And what a racket you make," muttered someone from the audience. Yet the show went on, delightful and absurd. The puppets sometimes leaned too far beyond the lights because their wires were too long, but no one minded. The doll in the drawer grew so excited that her mended neck burst open again. The money pig, though motionless, was deeply stirred. "Such talent," he thought. "I must do something noble in return." And so, with great solemnity, he decided that one of the performers should be mentioned in his will, to be buried with him in the family vault when his time should come. The idea pleased him immensely. It gave his life a sense of grandeur and importance. The comedy ended in thunderous applause. The toys were so pleased that they forgot all about the tea party, preferring instead to continue their intellectual play, as they called it, pretending to be men and women. There was nothing wicked about it, for after all, it was only a game. Yet even as they played, each thought chiefly of themselves, and some, with hidden envy, wondered what the money pig might be thinking. But the pig thought only of his will, his burial, and the great solemn day when all his riches would rest with him forever. Alas, that day came sooner than he dreamed. As he pondered these lofty things, a tremor passed through the wardrobe. Perhaps a door slammed, perhaps the wind stirred. But whatever it was, down fell the proud money pig from his high place. He struck the floor with a crash and shattered into a dozen glittering fragments. Out leapt the coins, clinking and rolling in wild delight. The small copper pennies spun like tiny tops upon the floor. The silver pieces rolled boldly away, exploring corners they had never seen before. One great crown piece, who had always longed to travel, rolled straight under the door and out into the world beyond. "Freedom!" he seemed to cry as he disappeared. By morning, the nurse swept the broken clay into the dustbin, whispering, "Poor fellow, he was too proud for his shelf." Yet on the very next day, a new money pig was brought home. Fresh, unchipped, and beautifully glazed, it took its place upon the same high cupboard. It had no coins within it yet, and therefore, like the old one, it could not rattle. But perhaps it would learn, in time, that fullness is not the only measure of worth. And thus ended the tale of the proud money pig, a creature who stood high above the rest, yet never learned to look kindly upon what lay below him. Under the Willow Tree. The country around the town of Kyoga is very bare. The town itself lies by the seashore, which is always beautiful, although it might be more beautiful than it is, because all around are flat fields and a forest a long way off. But one always finds something beautiful in the spot that is one's own home, something for which one longs, even when one is in the most wonderful spot in the world. And we must admit that the outer edge of Kyoga, where small, humble gardens line the little stream that flows into the sea, could be very pretty in the summertime. This was the opinion of the two small children, Knud and Johanna, who were playing there, crawling under the gooseberry bushes to reach each other. In one of the gardens there stood an elder tree, in the other an old willow, and under the latter the children were especially fond of playing. Although the tree stood close beside the stream, and they might easily have fallen into the water, they were allowed to play there, for the eye of God watches over little ones. Otherwise, they would be very badly off indeed. Besides, these two were careful about the water. In fact, the boy was so afraid of it that in the summer he could not be lured into the sea, where the other children were fond of splashing about. As a result, he had to bear the teasing of the others as best he could. But once Johanna, the little girl, dreamed she was out in a boat, and Knud waded out to join her, with the water rising until it closed over his head. And from the moment little Knud heard of this dream, he could no longer bear to be called a coward. He might really go into the water now, he said, since Johanna had dreamed it. He never carried that idea into practice, but for all that the dream remained his great pride. Their poor parents often came together, while Knud and Johanna played in the gardens or on the high road, where a long row of willows had been planted along the ditch. These trees, with their polled tops, certainly did not look very beautiful, but they were there for use rather than for ornament. The old willow tree in the garden was much lovelier, which was why the children took most delight in sitting under it. In Kyoga itself was a great marketplace, and at fair time this plaza was gay with whole streets of tents filled with silk ribbons, boots, and everything a person might desire. There were great crowds then, and generally the weather was rainy. One could easily smell the odor of peasants' clothes, but this could not destroy the fragrance that streamed from a booth full of honey cakes. And best of all, the man who kept this particular booth came every year during fair time to lodge in the house of little Knud's parents. Consequently, every now and then there was a present of a bit of honey cake, and of course, Johanna always received her share. But the best thing of all was that this gingerbread dealer knew all sorts of charming stories, and could even tell tales about his own gingerbread cakes. One evening, he told a story about them which made such a deep impression on the two children that they never forgot it. For that reason, perhaps we should hear it too, especially since it is not very long. On the shop counter, he said, there once lay 2 gingerbread cakes. One was in the shape of a man with a hat on, the other of a maiden with no bonnet, but with a blot of yellow on top of her head. Both their faces were on the upper side, for that was the side that was supposed to be looked at, and not the other. Indeed, most people have one side from which they should be viewed. On his left side, the man wore a bitter almond for a heart, but the maiden, on the other hand, was honey cake all through. They were placed on the counter as samples, so they remained there for a long time, until at last they fell in love with each other. But neither told the other, which they should have done if they had expected anything to come of it. He is a man, so he must speak first, thought the maiden. But she was quite contented, for she knew in her heart that her love was returned. His thoughts were far more extravagant, which is just like a man. He dreamed that he was a street urchin, and that he had 4 pennies all his own, and that he bought the maiden and ate her up. So they lay on the counter for days and weeks and grew dry, but the thoughts of the maiden remained still gentle and womanly. It's enough for me that I have lived on the same table with him, thought the maiden, and then she broke in two. If only she had known of my love, she would have held together a little longer, thought he. So that's the story, and here they are, both of them, said the baker. They're remarkable for their strange history and for their silent love, which never came to anything. And now they're both for you. With that he gave Johanna the man, who was still in one piece, and Knud got the broken maiden. But the children had been so touched by the story that they couldn't be so bold as to eat up the lovers. Next day they took them out to the Kyoga churchyard, where winter and summer, lovely ivy covers the church wall like a rich carpet. they stood the two cake figures up among the green leaves in the bright sunshine and told a group of other children the story of the silent love that was useless. That is to say, the love was, for the story was charming, they all found. But when they looked again at the gingerbread couple, they found that a mischievous big boy had eaten up the broken maiden. The children cried about that, and later, probably so that the poor lover might not be left alone in the world, they ate him up too. But they never forgot the story. The two children were always together by the elder tree or under the willow, and little Johanna sang the most beautiful songs in a voice as clear as a silver bell. Knud had not a note of music in him, but at least he knew the words of the songs, and that was something. But the people of Kjorga, even the wife of the hardware merchant, stopped and listened when Johanna sang. "She has a very sweet voice, that little girl," she said. Those were glorious days, but glorious days do not last forever, and finally the neighbors separated. Johanna's mother died, and her father planned to marry again in Copenhagen, where he had been promised a position as messenger, a job supposed to be very profitable. While the neighbors parted with regrets, the children wept bitterly, but the parents promised to write to each other at least once a year. And Knud was made apprentice to a shoemaker, for such a big boy was too old to run around wild any longer. And, furthermore, he was confirmed. Oh, how he would have liked to see little Johanna in Copenhagen on that day of celebration. But he didn't go, and he had never been there, although Kjorga is only 5 Danish miles away. On a clear day, Knud could see the distant towers of the city across the bay, and on the day of his confirmation, he could even see the golden cross on the tower of the Church of Our Lady glitter in the sun. Ah, how often his thoughts turned toward Johanna. And did she remember him? Yes. At Christmas time, a letter came from her father to Knud's parents, saying that they were doing very well in Copenhagen, and Johanna could look forward to a brilliant career on the strength of her lovely voice. She already had a position in the opera house and was already earning a little money, out of which she sent her dear neighbors of Kjorga $1 for a Merry Christmas Eve. Johanna herself added a postscript asking them to drink to her health, and in the same postscript was also written, "Friendly greetings to Knud." They all wept, but this was all very pleasant, for they were tears of joy that they shed. Knud's thoughts had been with Johanna every day, and now he knew that she also thought of him. The nearer came the end of his apprenticeship, the more clearly did he realize that he was in love with Johanna, and that she must be his little wife. When he thought of this, a smile brightened his face, and he drew the thread faster than before and pressed his foot against the knee strap. He didn't even pay any attention when he ran the awl deep into one of his fingers. He was determined that he would not play the silent lover like the 2 gingerbread cakes. The story had taught him a lesson. Now he was a journeyman, and his knapsack was packed ready for his trip. At last, for the first time in his life, he was to go to Copenhagen, where a master was already expecting him. How surprised and happy Johanna would be to see him. She was just 17 now, and he 19. He wanted to buy a gold ring for her before he left Kjorga, but then decided he could get a much nicer one in Copenhagen. And so he took leave of his parents, and on a rainy, windy day in autumn, set forth on foot from the town of his birth. The damp leaves were dropping from the trees. and he was wet to the skin when he arrived at his new master's home in the big city of Copenhagen. The following Sunday, he would pay a visit to Johanna's father. So, on Sunday, he put on the new journeyman's clothes and the new hat from Kyoga that became him very well, for till then he had only worn a cap. He easily found the house he was seeking and mounted flight after flight of stairs until he became almost dizzy. It seemed terrible to him for people to live piled up on top of each other in this intricate city. Everything in the parlor looked prosperous, and Johanna's father received him in kindly friendship. Knud was a stranger to the new wife, but she too shook hands with him and gave him a cup of coffee. "Johanna will be glad to see you," said the father. "You've grown into a nice-looking young man. Yes, wait till you see her. There is a girl who rejoices my heart, and please God, she will rejoice it still more. She has her own room now and pays us rent regularly for it." Then he knocked quite politely at his daughter's door, as if he were a stranger, and they went in. Oh, how pretty it was! He was certain there wasn't such a lovely room in all Kyoga. The queen herself could not be more charmingly lodged. There were carpets and window curtains that hung quite to the floor, and flowers and pictures, and a velvet chair, and even a mirror as large as a door, and so clear there was a danger of walking into it. A glance showed all this to Knud, and yet he could look at nothing but Johanna. She was a full-grown maiden now, quite different from Knud's memories of her, and much more beautiful. There wasn't a girl in Kyoga like her. How graceful she was, and with what a strange, unsure gaze she looked at Knud. But that was only for a moment, and then she rushed toward him as if it kissed him. She did not actually do so, but she very nearly did. Yes, she was really happy to see her childhood friend again. There were tears in Johanna's eyes. She had so much to say, and so many questions to ask about everything, from Knud's parents to the elder tree and the willow, which she called Elder Mother and Willow Father, just as if they had been human beings. And indeed they might be called so, just as much as the gingerbread cakes. She spoke of them too, and their silent love, and how they had lain on the shop counter and broken in two, and at this she laughed heartily, while the blood rushed to Knud's cheeks, and his heart beat faster and faster. No, she had not grown haughty at all, and Knud noticed quite well that it was because of her that her parents invited him to spend the evening. With her one hands, she poured out the tea and gave him a cup, and afterward she read aloud to them from a book, and it seemed to Knud that what she read was all about himself and his love, for it matched with his thoughts. Then she sang a simple little song, but her singing made it a real story that seemed to be the outpouring of her very heart. Yes, Knud knew she cared for him. He could not keep tears of joy from rolling down his cheeks, nor could he speak a single word. He seemed struck dumb. But she pressed his hand and murmured, "You have a good heart, Knud. Stay always the way you are now." That was a magnificent evening. It was impossible to sleep afterward, and accordingly Knud did not sleep. When he had left, Johanna's father had said, "Now don't forget us altogether. Don't let the whole winter go by before you come to us again." Knud felt that gave him permission to repeat the call the following Sunday, and determined to do so. But every evening after work, and the working hours lasted until candlelight there, Knud went out into the town. He returned to the street in which Johanna lived and looked up at her window. It was almost always lighted, and one evening he could even see the shadow of her face quite plainly on the curtain. That was an evening he would never forget. His master's wife did not like his gallivanting abroad every evening, as she put it, and shook her head ruefully over him. But the master only smiled. "He's just a young fellow," he said. "On Sunday we shall see each other," Knud thought, "and I shall tell her how she is always in my thoughts, and that she must be my little wife. I know I'm only a poor journeyman shoemaker, but I can become a master, and I'll work and save. Yes, I'll tell her that. No good comes from a silent love. I've learned that much from the gingerbread." Sunday came at last, and Knud set out, but to his great disappointment, they had to tell him they were all invited out that evening. But as he left, Johanna pressed his hand and said, "Have you ever been to the theater? You must go there sometime. I shall be singing on Wednesday, and if you have time that evening, I'll send you a ticket. My father knows where you are living." How kind it was of her. And at noon on Wednesday, he received a sealed envelope. There were no words inside, but the ticket was there. And that evening, Knud went to the theater for the first time in his life. And what did he see? He saw Johanna, looking more charming and beautiful than he ever could have believed possible. To be sure, she was married to a stranger, but that was just in the play. It was only make-believe, as Knud understood very well. If it had been true, he thought, she would never have had the heart to send him a ticket so that he could go and see it. And everybody shouted and applauded, and Knud cried out, "Hurrah!" Even the king was there, smiling at Johanna, and he seemed to delight in her loveliness. How small Knud felt then. Still, he loved her dearly, and felt that she loved him too. But he knew it was up to the man to speak the first word, as the gingerbread maiden in the story had taught him. Indeed, there was a great deal of truth in that story. So, as soon as Sunday came, he went to see her again, feeling as solemn as if he were going into a church. Johanna was at home, alone. It could not have happened more fortunately. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I almost sent Father after you, but I felt in my heart that you would be here this evening. I have to tell you that I am leaving for France on Friday. I must study there if I am to become a great artiste." At those words it seemed to Knud as if the whole room were whirling round and round with him. He felt as if his heart would break. There were no tears in his eyes, but Johanna could not fail to see how stricken he was. "You honest, faithful soul," she said, and her tenderness loosened his tongue. He told her how much he loved her and begged her to become his little wife. Then he saw Johanna turn pale as she dropped his hand and said seriously and sadly, "Dear Knud, don't make us both unhappy. I shall always be a loving sister to you, one in whom you may trust, but I shall never be anything more." Gently she placed her soft hand on his hot forehead. "God gives us the strength for much," she said, "if only we try to do our best." At that moment her stepmother entered the room and Johanna said, "Knud is quite heartbroken because I'm going away. Come, be a man." And she laid her hand on his shoulder. It seemed as if they had been talking only of her journey. "You're a child," she laughed, "but now you must be good and reasonable, as you used to be under the willow tree when we were both children." Knud felt as if the whole world were out of joint, and his thoughts were like a loose thread fluttering in the wind. He remained for tea, though he hardly knew if they had asked him to, and they were kind and gentle, and Johanna poured out his tea and sang to him. Her voice did not have its old tone, but still it was wonderfully beautiful and nearly broke his heart. And then they parted. Knud could not bear to offer his hand, but she took it and said, "Surely you'll shake hands with your sister at parting, old playmate." She smiled through the tears that were in her own eyes and repeated the word brother. Yes, that was supposed to be a great consolation. Such was their parting. She sailed for France, and Knud wandered about the muddy streets of Copenhagen. His comrades in the workshop asked why he was so gloomy and urged him to join them and amuse himself, for he was still a young fellow. So they took him to a dance hall. He saw many pretty girls there, but there was not one to compare with Johanna. Here, where he had hoped to forget her, she was more vivid than ever before the eyes of his soul. "God gives us the strength for much," she had said, "if only we try to do our best." Then a devotion came to his mind, and he folded his hands quietly. The violins played, and the girls danced gaily, and suddenly it seemed to him that he should never have brought Johanna into a place like this, for she was there with him, in his heart. Knud ran out and wandered aimlessly through the streets. He passed by the house where she had lived. It was dark there. Everywhere were darkness and emptiness and loneliness. The world went in its way, and Knud went his. Winter set in, and the waters froze over. It was as if everything were preparing itself for burial. But when spring returned, and the first steamer was to start, an intense longing seized him to go away, far into the world, anywhere, but not too close to France. So he packed his knapsack and wandered deep into Germany, from town to town, finding rest and peace nowhere. It was not until he came to the glorious old city of Nuremberg that he could quiet his restless spirit, and there he decided to stay. Nuremberg is a strange old city, looking as if it had been cut out of an old-fashioned picture book. The streets seem to wander along just as they please. The houses did not like to stand in regular rows. Gables with little towers, arabesques, and pillars lean out over the walks, and from the queer, peaked roofs, waterspouts, shaped like dragons or long, slim dogs, push out far over the streets. There in the Nuremberg marketplace stood Knud, his knapsack on his back. He was beside one of the old fountains, where splendid bronze figures, scriptural and historical, rose up between the gushing jets of water. A pretty little servant girl was just filling her pails, and she gave Knud a refreshing drink. And as her hand was full of roses, she gave him one of them too, and he accepted that as a good sign. From the church nearby came the strains of an organ. They rang as familiar to him as the tones of the organ at home in Kyoga Church, and he entered the great cathedral. The sunlight streamed in through the high stained glass windows and down between the lofty, slender pillars. His spirit found rest, and Knud found a good master in Nuremberg, and he lived in his house and there learned to speak German. The old moat around the town of Nuremberg has been converted into little kitchen gardens, but the high walls with their heavy towers are standing yet. The rope maker twists his cords on a wooden gallery along the inside of the town wall, where elder bushes grow out of the cracks and clefts, spreading their green branches over the small, lowly houses below. In one of these houses, Knud lived with his master, and over the little garret window where he slept, the elder tree waved its branches. Here he lived for a summer and winter. But when spring returned, he could bear it no longer, for the elder was blooming, and the fragrance of its blossoms carried him back to home and the garden at Kyoga. So Knud left that master and found another farther in town, over whose house no elder bush blossomed. His new workshop was close to one of the old stone bridges, by an ever-foaming, low water mill. The stream roared past it, hemmed in by the houses, whose decayed old balconies looked about to topple into the water. No elder grew here. There was not even a little green plant in a flower pot. But just opposite stood a grand old willow tree that seemed to cling fast to the house, as if it feared being carried away by the stream. It stretched its branches out over the river, just as the willow at Kyoga spread its arms across the stream by the gardens of home. Yes, Knud had gone from the elder mother to the willow father. This tree had something, especially on moonlit evenings, that went straight to his heart, and that something was not of the moonlight, but of the old willow tree itself. He could not remain there. Why not? Ask the willow tree, ask the blossoming elder. And so he bade farewell to his kind master and to Nuremberg, and traveled on further. To no one did he speak of Johanna, but hid his sorrow in his innermost heart, and he thought of the deep meaning of the old story of the gingerbread. Now he understood why the man had a bitter almond for a heart. He himself had felt the bitterness of it. And Johanna, who was always so gentle and smiling, she was only like the honey cake. The strap of Knud's knapsack seemed so tight across his chest that he could scarcely breathe. But even when he loosened it, he was not relieved. He saw only half the world around him. The other half he carried within him. That's how it was. Not until he was in sight of the high mountains did the world appear freer to him. Now his thoughts were turned outward again, and the tears came into his eyes. The Alps seemed to him like the folded wings of the earth. What if they were to unfold themselves and display their varied pictures of black woods, foaming waters, clouds, and great masses of snow? On the last day, he thought, the world will lift up its mighty wings and mount upward to God, to burst like a soap bubble before the glance of the highest. Ah, he sighed, that last day were here now. Silently, he wandered through a country that seemed to him like an orchard covered with soft turf. From the wooden balconies of the houses, girls, busy with their lace-making, nodded down at him. The summits of the mountains glowed in the red evening sun, and when he saw the blue lakes gleaming through the dark trees, he thought of the sea coast near Kyoga, and there was a sadness in his heart. But it was pain no longer. There where the Rhine rolls onward like a great wave, and then bursts into snow-white, gleaming, cloud-like masses, as if clouds were being created there, with the rainbow fluttering like a loose band above them. It was there that he thought of the mill at Kyoga, with its rushing, foaming stream. He would have been glad to have remained in the quiet Rhenish town, but here also there were too many elder trees and too many willows. So he traveled on over the mighty, towering mountains, through shattered walls of rock, and on roads that clung to the mountainsides like the nests of swallows. The waters foamed in the depths, the clouds themselves were below him, and he strode on in the warm summer sun over shiny thistles, alpine roses, and snow. Thus he said farewell to the lands of the north, and journeyed on under the shade of blooming chestnut trees, and through vineyards and fields of maize. Now the mountains were a wall between him and all his memories. That was how he wished it to be. At last he reached that great, glorious city called Milan, and here he found a German master who gave him work. The master and his wife, in whose workshop he labored now, were a pious old couple, and they became quite fond of the quiet journeyman, who said little but worked all the harder and led a devout Christian life. And to Knud also, it seemed that God had lifted the heavy burden from his heart. His favorite relaxation was to climb from time to time to the mighty marble church, which seemed to him to have been built of the snow of his native Northland, formed into images, pointed towers, and decorated open halls. From every corner and every niche, the white statues smiled down upon him. Above him was the blue sky. Below him were the city and the wide-spreading green plains of Lombardy. And toward the north, the high mountains capped with perpetual snow. Then he thought of the church at Kyoga, with its red ivy-colored walls, but he did not long to go there again. Here, beyond the mountains, he would be buried. He had lived there a year, and 3 years had passed since he had left his home, when one day his master took him into the city, not to the circus with its daring riders. No, to the great opera, where was an auditorium well worth seeing. There were 7 tiers of boxes, and from each beautiful silken curtains hung, while from the ground to the dizzy heights of the roof there sat the most elegant ladies, with corsages in their hands as if they were at a ball, and gentlemen in full dress, many of them with decorations of gold and silver. It was as bright there as in the noonday sunshine, and the music rolled gloriously and beautifully. Everything was much more splendid than in the theater at Copenhagen. But then Johanna had been in Copenhagen, and here, yes, it was like magic. Johanna was here also. The curtain rose, and she appeared, clad in silk and gold, with a gold crown upon her head. She sang as none but an angel could sing, and came far forward to the front of the stage, and smiled as only Johanna could smile, and looked straight down at Knud. The poor boy seized his master's arm and called out aloud, "Johanna!" The loud music sounded above everything, but no one heard but the master, who nodded his head. "Yes," he said, "her name is Johanna." Then he drew forth his program and showed Knud her name, for the full name was printed there. No, it was not a dream. The great audience applauded and threw wreaths and flowers to Johanna, and every time she went away they called her back on stage, so that she was always going and coming. In the street outside afterward, the people crowded about her carriage and drew it away in triumph. Knud was in the first row and shouted as joyfully as any. And when the carriage halted before her brightly lighted house, he was standing close beside the door. It opened, and she stepped out. The light fell upon her beloved face, and she smiled, thanked them graciously, and appeared deeply touched. Knud looked straight into her eyes, and she into his, but she never knew him. A gentleman with a decoration glittering on his breast gave her his arm. People said they were betrothed. Then Knud went home and packed his knapsack. He had decided to return to his own home, to the elder and willow trees. Ah, beneath the willow tree. The old couple begged him to remain, but no words could change his mind. It was in vain that they pointed out to him that winter was coming, and the snow had already fallen in the mountains. He replied that he could march, with his knapsack on his back, and supported by his cane, in the wake of a slow-moving carriage, for which a path would have to be cleared. So Knud left for the mountains and climbed up them and down them, His strength grew less, but still he saw no village or house. Always he plodded onward toward the north. High above him the stars gleamed, his feet stumbled, and his head grew dizzy with the heights. Stars seemed to shine deep in the valley, too, as if there were another sky below him. He felt ill. More and more stars became visible below him. They glowed brighter and brighter and moved to and fro. Then he realized it was the lights of a little town that were shining down there. When he was sure of that, he put forth the last of his strength and finally reached the shelter of a humble inn. He remained there that night and the whole of the next day, for his body was in desperate need of rest and refreshment. The ice was beginning to thaw, and there was rain in the valley. But on the second morning, a man with a hand organ came to the inn and played a Danish melody. And now Knud could not remain. He resumed his journey northward, tramping on for many days, hurrying as though he were trying to reach home before all were dead there. But to no man did he speak of his longing, for no one would have believed in the sorrow of his spirit, the deepest a human heart can feel. Such grief is not for the world, for it is not amusing, nor is it for friends. And this man had no friends. A stranger, he wandered through strange lands toward his home in the north. He had received only one letter from home, and it was now years since his parents had written. "You are not really Danish as we here at home. We love our country, but you love only a strange country." Thus his parents had written him. Yes, they thought they knew him. Now it was evening. He was tramping along the public highway. The frost had settled down, and the country had become flatter, with fields and meadows on all sides. And near the road, there grew a great willow tree. The whole outlook reminded Knud strongly of home. It looked so Danish, and with a deep sigh, he sat down under the tree. He was very tired, his head began to nod, and his eyes closed in slumber. But still he seemed to see the tree stretching its arms above him, and in his wandering fancy the tree seemed to be a mighty old man, the willow father himself, carrying his tired son in his arms back to his Danish home, to the bare, bleak shore of Kyoga and the garden of his childhood. Yes, he dreamed that this was the willow tree of Kyoga that had traveled out into the world in search of him, and at last had found him, and had carried him back into the little garden beside the stream. And there stood Johanna in all her splendor, with the golden crown on her head, just as he had seen her last, and she called out, "Welcome," to him. And before him stood two remarkable figures, looking much more human than he remembered them from his childhood. They had changed too, but they were still the two gingerbread cakes, the man and the maiden, that turned their right sides toward him and looked very handsome. "We thank you," both said to Knud. "You have loosened our tongues and taught us that thoughts should be spoken freely, or nothing will come of them. And now something has come of them. We are betrothed." Then they walked hand in hand through the street S of Kyoga and looked very respectable even on the wrong side. No one could have found any fault with them. On they went, straight toward Kyoga Church, and Knud and Johanna followed them. They too walked hand in hand. The church stood there as it had always stood, with the beautiful green ivy growing on its red walls, and the great door of the church swung open, and the organ pealed, and the gingerbread couple walked up the aisle. "Our master first," said the cake pair, and made room for Johanna and Knud to kneel before the altar, and she bent her head over him, and the tears fell from her eyes. but they were icy cold, for it was the ice around her heart that was melting, softened by his strong love. The tears fell upon his burning cheeks, and then he awoke, and he was sitting under the old willow tree in a foreign land on that cold winter evening. An icy hail from the Coudes was beating on his face. "That was the most wonderful hour of my life," he cried, "and it was just a dream. Oh God, let me dream again." Then he closed his eyes once more and dreamed again. Toward morning there was a great snowstorm, and the wind blew it in drifts over him. And when the villagers came forth to go to church, they found a journeyman sitting by the roadside. He was dead, frozen to death beneath the willow tree.